Welcome to audiobook, YouTube channel, and Facebook page. Hello friends. Today I pageant for you the last thing you told me. Fast part, second paragraph. Greene Street before it was Greene Street. I met Owen and Bailey over 2 years ago. I was still living in New York City then. I was living 3,000 miles from Sausalito, the small Northern California town that I now call home. Sausalito is on the other side of the Golden Gate from San Francisco, but a world away from city life. Quiet, charming, sleepy. It's the place that Owen and Bailey have called home for more than a decade. It is also the polar opposite of my previous life, which kept me squarely in Manhattan, in a lofted storefront on Greene Street in SoHo, a small space with an astronomical rent I never quite believed I could afford. I used itas, both my workshop and my showroom. I turn wood. That's what I do for work. People usually make a face when I tell them this is my job, however I try to describe it, images of their high school woodshop class coming to mind. Being a wet turner is a little like that, and nothing like that. I like to describe it as sculpting, but instead of sculpting clay, I sculpt wood. I come by the profession naturally. My grandfather was a wood turner, an excellent one, at that, and his work was at the center of my life for as far back as I can remember. He was at the center of my life for as far back as I can remember, having raised me mostly on his own. My father, Jack, and my mother, Carol, who preferred that I refer to her as Carol, were largely uninterested in doing any children. They were largely uninterested in anything except my father's photography career. My grandfather encouraged my mother to make an effort with me when I was young, but I barely knew my father, who traveled for work 280 days a year. When he did have time off, he hunkered down at his family's ranch in Suisun, Tennessee, as opposed to driving the 2 hours to my grandfather's house in Franklin to spend time with me. And, shortly after my 6th birthday, when my father left my mother for his assistant, a woman named Gwendolyn, who was nearly 21, my mother stopped coming home as well. She chased my father down until he took her back. Then she left me with my grandfather full time. If it sounds like a sob story, it isn't. Of course, it isn't ideal to have your mother all but disappear. It certainly didn't feel good to be on the receiving end of the choice. But, when I look back now, I think my mother did me a favor, exiting the way she did, without apology, without vacillation. At least she made it clear there was nothing I could have done to make her want to stay. And, on the other side of her exit, I was happier. My grandfather was stable and kind, and he made me dinner every night and waited for me to finish dinner before he announced it was time to get up and read me stories before we went to sleep. And he always let me watch him work. I loved watching him work. He'd start with an impossibly enormous piece of wood, moving it over a lathe, turning it into something magical. Or, if it was less than magical, he would figure out how to start over again. That was probably my favorite part of watching him work, when he would throw up his hands and say, "Well, we've got to do this different, don't we?" Then he'd go about finding a new way into what he wanted to create. I'm guessing any psychologist worth her salt would say that it must have given me hope that I must have thought my grandfather would help me do the same thing for myself, to start again. But, if anything, I think I took comfort in the opposite. Watching my grandfather work taught me that not everything was fluid. There were certain things that you hit from different angles, but you never gave up on. You did the work that was needed, wherever that work took you. I never expected to be successful at web turning or at my foray from there to making furniture. I half expected I wouldn't be able to make a living out of it. My grandfather regularly supplemented his income by picking up construction work. But early on, when one of my more impressive dining room tables was featured in Architectural Digest, I developed a niche among a subset of downtown New York City residents. As one of my favorite interior designers explained it, my clients wanted to spend a lot of money decorating their homes in a way that made it look like they weren't spending any money at all. My rustic wood pieces helped with their mission. Over time, this devoted clientele turned into a somewhat larger clientele in other coastal cities and resort towns: Los Angeles, Aspen, East Hampton, Park City, San Francisco. This was how Owen and I met. Ab Thompson, the CEO of the tech firm where Owen worked, was a client. Ab and his wife, the ridiculously gorgeous Belle, were among my most loyal clients. Belle liked to joke that she was Abt's trophy wife, which may have been funnier if it also wasn't so on point. She was a former model, 10 years younger than his grown children, born and raised in Australia. My pieces were in every room of her town house in San Francisco, where she and Abe lived together, and her newly constructed country house in St. Helena, a small town on the northern end of Napa Valley where Belle tended to retrieve. I had met Abe only a handful of times before he and Owen showed up at my workshop. They were in New York for an investor meeting and Belle wanted them to stop by to check on her old bedside table she'd asked me to make for their bedroom. Abe wasn't sure what he should be checking for, something about how the table would look with a the bed frame that would hold their $10,000 organic mattress. Abe couldn't have cared less, honestly. When he and Owen walked in, he was in a sharp blue suit, his gray hair crunchy with hair gel, the phone glued to his ear. He was in the middle of a phone call. He took one look at the side table and briefly covered the mouthpiece. "Looks fine to me," he said. We could hear. Then, before I answered, he headed outside. Owen, on the other hand, was mesmerized. He did a slow sweep of the whole workshop, stopping to study each piece. I watched him as he walked around. He was such a confusing picture, this long-limbed guy with shaggy blonde hair and sun-drenched skin, in worn-out Converse sneakers, all of which seemed at odds with his fancy sports jacket. It was almost like he fell off a surfboard into the jacket, the starched shirt beneath it. I realized I was staring and started to turn away just as Owen stopped in front of my favorite piece of farm table that I used as a desk. My computer and newspapers and small tools covered most of it. You could only make out the table beneath if you were really looking. He was. He took in the stiff redwood that I had chiseled down, gently yellowing the corners, welding rough metal to each edge. Was Owen the first customer to notice the table? No, of course not. But he was the first to bend down, just like I'd often do, running his fingers along the sharp metal and holding the table there. He turned his head and looked up at me. "Ouch," he said. "Try bumping up against it in the middle of the night," I said. Owen stood back up, giving the table a tack goodbye. Then he walked over to me. He walked over to me until somehow we were standing close to each other, too close, really, for me not to wonder how we'd gotten there. I probably should have felt self-conscious about my tank top and paint-splattered jeans, the messy bun on top of my head, my unwashed curls falling out of it. I felt something else though, watching him look at me. "So," he said, "what's the asking price?" "Actually, the table is the only piece in the showroom that's not for sale," I said. "Because it could cause injury," he said. "Exactly," I said. This was when he smiled. When Owen smiled. It was like the title of a bad pop song. To be clear, it wasn't that his smile lit up his face. It wasn't anything as sentimental or explosive as that. It was more that his smile was generous, childlike. Smile made him seem kind. It made him seem kind in a way I wasn't used to running into on Greene Street in downtown Manhattan. It was expensive in a way I'd started to doubt I'd ever run into on Greene Street in downtown Manhattan. So, no negotiating on the table. Then, he said, "Afraid not, but I could show you some different pieces. How about a lesson instead? You could show me how to make a similar table for myself, but maybe with slightly kinder edges," he said. "I'll sign a waiver. Any injuries acquired would be at my own risk." I was still smiling, but I felt confused. Because all of a sudden I didn't think we were talking about the table. I felt fairly confident that we weren't. I felt as confident as a woman could who had spent the last 2 years engaged to a man whom she'd realized she couldn't marry 2 weeks before their wedding. "Look, Ethan," I said. "Owen," he corrected. "Owen." "That's nice of you to ask," I said, "but I kind of have a no dating policy with clients. Well, it's a good thing I can't afford to buy anything." "You're selling then," he said. But that stopped him. He shrugged, as if to say some other time, and headed toward the door and Abt, who was pacing back and forth on the sidewalk, still on his phone call, yelling at the person on the other end. He was almost out the door. He was almost gone. But I felt instantly and strongly the need to reach out and stop him from leaving, to say that I hadn't meant it. I'd meant something else. I'd meant he should stay. I'm not saying it was love at first sight. What I'm saying is that a part of me wanted to do something to stop him from walking away. I wanted to be around that stretched out smile a little longer. Wait, I said. I looked around, searching for something to hold him there, zeroing in on a textile that belonged to another client. Holding it up. This is football. It was not my finest moment. And, as my former fiancé would tell you, it was also completely out of character for me to reach out to someone as opposed to pulling away. I'll make sure she gets it, he said. He took it from me, avoiding my eyes. For the record, I have one too. A no dating policy. I'm a single father, and it goes with the territory he possessed. But my daughter's a theater junkie, and I'll lose serious points if I don't see a play while I'm in New York. Emotion toward an angry act, screaming on the sidewalk. A play's not exactly act's thing, as surprising as that sounds. Very, I said. So what do you think? Do you want to come? He didn't move closer, but he did look up. He looked up and met my eyes. Let's not consider it a date, he said. It will be a time thing. We'll agree on that going in. Just enter into play. Nice to meet you because of our policies, I said. His smile returned, open and generous. Yes, he said. Because of them. What's that smell? Bailey asks. I'm pulled from my memory to find Bailey standing in the kitchen doorway. She looks irritated, standing there in a chunky sweater, a messenger bag slung over her shoulder, her purple streaked hair caught beneath its strap. I smile at her, my phone cradled under my chin. I have been trying to reach Owen, unsuccessfully, the phone going to voicemail. Again and again. Sorry, I didn't see you there, I say. She doesn't respond, her mouth pinched. I put my phone away, ignoring her perma-scowl. She's a beauty, despite it. She's a beauty, in a way that I've noticed strikes people when she walks into a room. She doesn't look much like Owen, her purple hair naturally a chestnut brown, her eyes dark and fierce. They're intense, those eyes. They pull you in. Owen says that they're just like her grandfather's. Her mother's father, which is why they named her after him. A girl named Bailey. Just Bailey. Where's my dad? She says. He's supposed to drive me to play. Practice. My body tenses as I feel Owen's note in my pocket, like a weight protector. I'm sure he's on his way, I say. Let's eat some dinners that won't smells, she says. She wrinkles her nose, just in case it isn't clear that the smell to which she is referring isn't one she likes. It's the linguine that you had at Poggio, I say. She gives me a blank look, as though Poggio isn't her favorite local restaurant, as though we weren't there for dinner just a few weeks before to celebrate her 16th birthday. Bailey ordered that night's special, a homemade multigrain linguine in a brown butter sauce, and Owen gave her a little taste of his glass of Malbec to go with it. I thought she loved the pasta, but maybe what she loved was drinking wine with her father. I put a heaping portion on a plate and placed it on the kitchen island. Try a little, I say. You're going to like it. Bailey stares at me, trying to decide if she is in the mood for a showdown, if she's in the mood for her father's disappointment. Should I snitch to him about her fast dinners? Exit. Deciding against it, she bites back her annoyance and hops onto her bar stool. Fine, she says. I'll have a little. Bailey almost tries with me. That's the worst part. She isn't a bad kid or a menace. She's a good kid in a situation she hates. I just happen to be the situation. There are the obvious reasons why a teenage girl would be averse to her father's new wife, especially Bailey, who had a good day going when it was just the two of them together, best friends, Owen her biggest fan. Though, those reasons don't cover the totality of Bailey's dislike for me. It isn't just that I got her age wrong when we first met. It comes down to an afternoon shortly after I moved to Sausalito. I was supposed to pick her up at school, but I got stuck on a call with a client and I arrived 5 minutes late. Not 10 minutes. 5:05 p.m. That was what the clock said when I pulled up to her friend's house. But it may as well have been an hour. Bailey is an exacting girl. Owen will tell you that this is a quality we have in common. Both his wife and his daughter can decipher everything about someone else in 5 minutes. That's all it takes. And in the 5 minutes Bailey was making her decision about me, I was on a telephone call I shouldn't have taken. Bailey pours some pasta onto her fork, studying it. This Looks different than Poggio. Well, it's not. I convinced the sous chef to give me the recipe. He even sent me to the ferry building to pick up the garlic bread he serves with it. You drove into San Francisco to get a loaf of bread, she says. It's possible that I tried too hard with her. There's that. She leans in and puts the whole bite in her mouth. I bite my lip, anticipating her approval volume escaping our lips, in spite of herself. Which is when she gags on it. She actually gags, reaching for a glass of water. What did you put in that? She says. It tastes like charcoal, but I tasted it, I say. It's perfect. I take another bite. Myself. She's not wrong. In my confusion over my 12-year-old visitor and Owen's note, the butter sauce had transformed from its slightly malted, foamy richness into actually just being burned and bitter. Not unlike eating a campfire. I gotta go anyway, she says. Especially if I want to get her. It from Suze. Bailey stands up, and I picture Owen standing behind me, leaning down to whisper in my ear, "Wait it out." That's what he says when Bailey is dismissive of me. Wait it out. Meaning she'll come around one day. Also meaning she's leaving for college in 2.5 short years. But Owen doesn't understand that. This doesn't comfort me. To me, this just means I'm running out of time to make her want to move toward me. And I do want her to move toward me. I want us to have the relationship, and not just because of Owen. It's more than that. What draws me toward Bailey even as she pushes me away. Part of it is that I recognize in her the thing that happens when you lose your mother. My mother left by choice, Bailey's by tragedy, but it leaves a similar imprint on you either way. It leaves you in the same strange place, trying to figure out how to navigate the world without the most important person watching. I'll walk over to Suze's, she says. She'll drive me sus. Her friend Suze, who was also in the play. Suze who lives on the docks too. Suze who is safe, isn't she? Protect her. Let me take you, I say. No, she pulls her purple hair behind her ears, checks her tone. That's okay. Suze's going anyway if your father isn't back yet, I say. I'll come and pick you up. One of us will be waiting for you out front. She drills me with Alec. Why wouldn't he be back? She says he will. I'm sure he will. I just meant if I come get you, then you can drive home. Bailey just got her learner's permit. It'll be a year of her driving with an adult until she can drive alone. And Owen doesn't like her driving at night, even when she's with him, which I try to utilize as an opportunity. Sure, Bailey says. Thanks. She walks toward the door. She wants out of the conversation and into the Sausalito where she would say anything to get there, but I take itas a date. So I'll see you in a few hours. See ya, she says. And I feel happy for just a second. Then the front door is slamming behind her. And I'm alone again with Owen's note, the inimitable silence of the kitchen, and enough burnt pasta to feed a family of 10.